Thank you very much for joining us here on the Voice of Job Seekers podcast. Even though this is a live stream, just to draw a distinction between a podcast and a live stream, this is eventually going to end up on the podcast, but I want to present it to you guys live so that you can get this information and get this content right away. And hopefully, you'll be able to find useful and helpful hints to inform your particular job search and career goals. And we're talking about the four truths of 2020's workforce we should embrace. This is Alex Levit. Those of you who don't know her, a lot of my colleagues do know her from the different conferences and different articles that we all end up reading. And if you don't know her by her Wall Street Journal uh, gig, then you probably have known her throughout her books. And she's a workforce futurist and also a columnist, like I said, for Wall Street Journal, CEO at Inspirational Work, international bestseller of Humanity Works, which I do have a copy and been reading throughout time. And just want to welcome you actually back to the show.
Yes, thank you, Mark, for having me back. I think the first time that I came on the Voice of Job Seekers was 10, 12 years ago, perhaps. Could that be right?
That maybe not that long ago, but it sure seems like that long ago,
Okay.
actually. And you were a multiple time guest. You were just weren't,
Mhm.
we just weren't
Mhm.
hanging out for onesies. I think you were on at least four times. And if I'm not mistaken, Alex, I was the first podcast you were on. Is that correct?
That's probably true because you definitely started podcasting earlier than most. You had your finger on the pulse of that trend very, very early on. So
Yeah.
that's absolutely possible.
Yeah, although I was kind of late to the party, but in our industry, I think there were very few. There was Chris Russell's Career
Mhm.
Cloud, and then I'm also reminded of Jet Altman's
Mhm.
show that he's been doing this since 2010, longer than I have, I think,
Mhm.
2009, maybe even earlier. But he has something like 2,300 shows.
Wow.
Can you imagine? Wow.
That's
But
amazing.
anyway, shout out to Jeff, shout out to Chris Russell,
Mhm.
to
Hi,
both of
Jeff and
them.
Chris.
And just want to talk with you for a few minutes about your article that you had on the
Mhm.
workforceinstitute.org. And I should put that in the link somewhere so that people can get a hold of it. But we're talking about, again, your article, Four Truths of 2020's Workforce We Should Embrace. And I think that's very important because there is a major shift in the way that we think about work and the way we're looking at work from this point on. We're not even talking about how a lot of people still need to catch up from, when you were writing about it back in 2012,
Mhm.
2013. We're talking
Mhm.
about now, we do see a lot of those things come to fruition.
Isn't it fun when you see the
Yeah,
thing come to
it's
fruition?
wonderful, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my friend Jack Kelly, who also writes for Forbes and is one of my co-hosts in one of the shows that
Mhm.
we've done throughout the past couple of years, he's very also has his finger on the pulse, and actually some of which he adapts not directly from your writing, but from his perspective as a business owner in compliance and has done recruiting for many years. I mention him because he also has his finger very much on it. And I think one of the points that you came up with was the number one, and just going by the article, and I think all
Mhm.
this is that machines are our partners and that we need to be really, when it comes down to it, we need to be adapting to what the technology is and not and it's kind of a two-way street, technology adapting to us as we adapt to technology. Is that the right way to frame it here?
I think that's a perfect way to frame it. And the thing that I try to emphasize to everyone is that automation is not one of those things where it's set and forget, where you
Mhm.
say, all right, I'm going to lay off a percentage of my workforce because I'm going to replace them with automation. And then you put the automation in and you don't need any people to be involved in the process. And that's really a very strong misconception. In fact,
Mhm.
whenever you insert a machine into a traditionally human driven process, you still need a person to design the machine, to oversee the machine's activities, to fix the machine when it's not working as intended, and to figure out if it's not working as intended, how can we redeploy it? You also need people who are in a category that I call the explainers. And these people exist for the express purpose of taking the data that the machine comes up with and
Hmm.
explaining it to decision makers so decision makers feel comfortable making widespread forecasts, making decisions about their business based on the data and the insights that are coming out. So that's actually a lot of people that have to be involved with the oversight of machines. And of course, there's the ethical question too, where we have to make sure that the decisions that the machine is making are not just things that are in the best interest of the bottom line, but are in the best interest of us from a reputational and ethical standpoint. Because machines don't have a conscience. They're just doing what
Hmm.
they're programmed to do. And
Yeah.
sometimes that backfires in kind of an unintended way. If you're not looking, if you're you don't have your eyes on the road, then you could very likely miss that the machine is doing things that may not long term be in the best interests of your organization.
Yeah, I think that for the most part, though, that as you were talking about it through your book, I think it was
Mhm,
2018 or 19 when it came out,
mhm,
and you and I did a subsequent article on
mhm,
flex jobs
mhm,
afterwards. One thing I think that people thought that AI was just going to come and elbow and bully everybody out and say,
right.
"Here I am,"
Mhm,
and that definitely hasn't been the case. In fact, if any company
yeah.
had thought that's how it was going to go down, they were sadly mistaken, because what we
Mhm.
find out is no, we really need people.
Right. I mean, and that's for the reasons that we just talked about, right? It's because
Right.
you can't just set and forget AI either. And I think people have this notion that AI is going to be this all powerful, smarter than human beings, has every capability in a greater degree than human
Hmm.
beings. And in fact, there are certain things that humans are better at and certain things that AI is better at. And that's why I say
Hmm.
that they make the best partners, because really they can complement each other in some pretty cool ways if you know how to deploy a team that is what I call a human machine hybrid team, where it encompasses both people and aspects of technology that are artificially intelligent driven.
Yeah, yeah. And just for anybody that's watching, say hi to us. Let us know that
Hi,
you're out there
Lily.
watching.
Thanks for coming
uh,
today.
I, I don't know exactly who's
Mhm,
watching just
mhm,
yet,
mhm,
but I hope that people are going to take notes later on.
mhm,
Machines are our friends, is what we're ultimately saying. Machines are not there to try to steal anything. And in fact, for those who may need to have a longer range look on how maybe they can be part of the revolution by enhancing the use of the machine, is going to be helpful also to their careers.
mhm. Absolutely. I think that's one of the most important things that people can learn when it comes to upskilling, and an area that both you and I talk a lot about is
Hmm.
how you can keep yourself marketable, how you can keep your skills fresh. And one of the skills that's so important is what I call applied technology skills.
Hmm.
So, what applied technology skills mean, and I know we've talked about it on the show in the past,
Hmm.
it's leveraging people, processes, data, and devices to do your job more effectively. So, as an
Hmm.
example, it's not necessarily that you know how to build a website from scratch or build an app from scratch, but you know that the technology exists to build an app and that you can use that technology to do it in a quicker way, in a simpler way. And those applied technology skills are something that pretty much regardless of your role, regardless of your level, your tenure, what you do for a living, your profession, you're going to need those because technology has infiltrated every profession to some degree. If you're a lawyer, for example, you need to know that you don't have to go to manual records and look up cases, that you can do so using software that will look up case histories from in a very, very rapid manner. And if
Hmm.
you don't know that that technology exists, you are going to be left behind because people are going to be able to do that case research much faster than you'll be able to do it. And so that's why these applied technology skills are essential. And how do you get them? Well, it's just a matter of asking people, reading in your field, learning how are other people doing it, attending conferences, learning about new technologies, and having a lot of conversations and brainstorms about how you can bring this new technology to your profession to, again, do your job more effectively and efficiently.
Hmm. Yeah, yes, which kind of merges into your second point in the article. It talks about we restructure agile workforces, and I
Mhm,
think one of the main points is that how mobile is really become sort of the catalyst on how we can realign our work and really get a great vision of what that looks like, at least as far as our lifestyle. Because I've been talking about in
mhm,
recent years of how job search is a lifestyle, and I'm not just talking about constantly looking for a job. I'm
mhm,
just talking about the constant access that we have within our grips. When we're on vacation, we need
mhm,
something to read. We can get our mobile and kind of still
mhm.
plug into the things that are relevant in our career without feeling the effects of having to feel like it's work.
Yeah. And the smartphone was obviously extremely influential in this development. And
Hmm.
things like Zoom video conferencing technology, like we're using right now, this is technology that's been available for a couple of decades. It didn't really reach critical mass until the pandemic mandated it. And I
Hmm.
think one of the bigger mistakes that we can make as a society is saying, oh, well, we're kind of done with COVID-19. So let's try to go back to the way things were. Let's have everybody in an office full time, and
Yes.
we are mandating that they do X, Y, and Z, when in fact, this is something that we were talking about well before the pandemic. The
Hmm.
technology exists to make it possible. People prefer, by and large, this type of flex environment where sometimes you can be in a conference room with other individuals face to face. Sometimes you can be working asynchronously at home. It's a method that just works with today's lifestyle. And the fact is, the COVID 19 pandemic is absolutely not the last disruption we are going to see. Could there
Right.
be another pandemic? Absolutely. Could there be adverse climate events where you physically can't go into an office again because there's been a flood, there's been
Hmm.
a blackout? These things,
Hmm.
unfortunately, I hate to break it to everyone, are going to be happening more and more throughout the 2020s, throughout the 2030s. And so being able to work in this way is really, really important. And more crucially, as an organization, allowing your people to work this way and to make this a permanent part of how your organization is structured is so important, because we cannot go backward. If we do go backward, we're just going to find ourselves having to rebuild again with the next disruption, a hybrid workforce, and I really don't see the point of that.
And what's interesting, and to your point, I just thought about how, and I learned while my son was in the Air Force,
Mhm,
there were a couple of times when he was based in Charleston, South Carolina, they had to evacuate the whole city when there was a
mhm,
hurricane warning, or that in one case there was an actual hurricane that actually came through, wasn't as destructive to that city as they were to others, but all that to say that they were able to get thousands of people to evacuate, but they also get thousands of people to come back at the same time with very few hitches. And all that
mhm,
to say is that a lot of it is just communication, and communication that they had accessible right away. And
mhm,
I think in terms of what people have to understand from companies, they want that kind of flexibility and agility to where you can leave and you can come back without as
mhm,
many hitches. I think there's a fight in different pockets of where companies where they have different, some companies have an unrealistic expectation of people just always being plugged in and into one stationary place, and there's a section of the workforce that's
mhm,
also saying that I'd rather be plugged in into one particular place. That really, that just not only applies to just where you physically are, but how you are in your career and what you'll need to toggle, because your every toggle or every switch that you do, it's not going to look the same ever, the same way it has in the past.
That's right. And this customization of careers is something that you and I have been talking about for years. And it
Hmm.
applies more than ever now because people have a lot of choices with respect to not just what they do, but how they do it.
Yeah.
And so to be flexible as an organization and be willing to say, we like this person, we think they have this core skill set, we think they have potential. Could they do their work in a different way than they have in the past? And by the way, this doesn't just apply to professionals. This
Right.
applies to everybody. And that's something I get a lot of pushback on. Oh, well,
Hmm.
we're a retail organization. We need people to actually be there. Yes, this is true. You do need people to be there. But how they're there, when they're there, you can be a little bit more creative about it. You can allow people to schedule their own shifts. You can allow them to switch shifts with somebody else. The technology more than exists to
Yes.
facilitate this kind of system. So I don't like it when certain organizations say, we're an in-person organization, we have essential workers, we can't offer flexibility, because that's simply not true.
Yes, which merges into your next point
Mhm.
about emphasizing creativity,
Mhm.
which really on both ends really needs to take place. Employers need to visualize their
Mhm.
employees having and be willing to be more flexible, because it
Mhm.
does add to their livelihood, and employees are wanting a job where it will merge. It doesn't necessarily have to all collide or have
Right.
to go together perfectly, but they do want to kind of merge their ideas and their livelihood together in such a way that it doesn't always have to feel like work because I'm being stalked.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if that sounds clear, that's where people are really looking to find those kind of jobs. Or maybe if they want to make it separate, that's fine, but it
Mhm.
doesn't have to disrupt completely their lives, because again, they may have to move like the military does. If there's a hurricane, everybody's going to need to shift some way physically. So that means either whether they take care of their work, or take their work with them, or that they're going to have to adapt to uh, whatever it takes to get the work done in a necessary manner.
Yeah, I would like to see creativity take a major role, especially when it comes to skills. I'm working on a new book that's coming out this winter with a
Oh.
company called Eightfold, and Eightfold has software that allows us to determine if somebody has skill A, might they also have skill B? And
Mhm.
it's a way of helping organizations and individuals to see how careers can be nonlinear, and how if you have one skill set, you could quite easily be trained into a different skill set, so that when you're an organization, if you find that a certain area of your business is experiencing a downturn, instead of laying off those people, you have the intelligence, and we call it talent intelligence, behind you to say, we don't have to lay these people off. We can retrain them in this area, and they can be just as successful doing a job that's necessary to the organization right now. But this does require a little bit of a leap of faith. It requires some creativity. And I think it's also really beneficial for organizations, not just to do it for their own benefit, but because it can benefit society at large when you help greater numbers of people be employed for more sustained periods of time. And at the end of the day, we talked about this research years ago. People don't
Mhm.
want to be jumping around a lot. They would prefer to have stable employment, the majority of people. And I
Mhm.
think that's a misconception with the great resignation, that everybody wants to be moving around and disrupting their lives and their careers. People would rather, if they like an organization and feel like the organization has their back, they'd rather stick with that organization. And so if you can use talent intelligence and say, all right, well, here's your skill set. Here are the multitude of things that you can do with that skill set to help our business in different ways. I think it's something that, again, the technology is there. Are we using it? Has it taken taken up mass residence in the job seeking and workforce world? No, but I think this is definitely where it's going.
Yeah, and I think people are moving only because they're not getting the satisfaction from the employer, and employers stuck in their heels. And it seems like a lot of leaders and leaders of organizations, they are more apt to still there's this pushback to getting some things back the way they used to be, as opposed to imagining how everything can really be synced together, which may include some
Mhm.
movement in the workforce. But there are still a lot of people who want the stability. I know a lot of older people are still wanting somewhere where they can ride into the sunset with, so to speak. That's not a bad thing, but how realistic it is when we don't see an employer kind of meeting people halfway with kind of giving them the vision that, hey, technology in your life can work together and we all can work
Mhm.
together. It may need a little patience, but it can
Yeah.
do so. And that's why your fourth point about being conscious about technology use,
Mhm.
I think that's a big pushback on both sides where
Mhm.
they really don't agree, is where people are saying, well, we want our space and being
Mhm.
able to do it. And they said, well, you can only have your space, but not from 9 to 5.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be a continual push and pull. And
Yeah.
it brings us back full circle to machines are our friends, machines are our partners.
Hmm.
We don't necessarily need to use that as a justification to work so much more or so much less. I think at the end of the day, really, machines provide us with an opportunity to do work that's more strategic and more meaningful to us, as opposed to spending a lot of time doing administrative tasks, doing manual tasks that really are that's the type of work that tends to, some people like it, but a lot of people feel bored, they feel uninspired. And so let's let machines take over what they're good at, which is repetitive work with large data sets to kind of distill out the key insights. And then once we have those insights, we can use our creative human brains to really make the most of them.
Absolutely. So, all in all, in this, if you were to summarize what the way that people need, particularly job seekers, we
Mhm.
know we love employers. We I understand you work with them quite a bit,
Mhm. Mhm.
but what's the one takeaway that job seekers need to understand in going into 2023, 2024, and what their expectations employers should be when it comes to using technology in their lives and
Mhm.
how they can merge it and make into one.
I would like to communicate to job seekers that the secret to gainful employment in the 2020s is what we call career durability. And
Mhm,
that means that you have the attitude and the skills to remain gainfully employed despite what disruptions might occur in the external world. And there are
mhm,
5 pillars of career durability. It's having the right mix of hard skills, soft skills, applied technology skills, which we talked about, a growth
mhm,
mindset, and institutional knowledge, or having been in an industry or in a profession long enough to generally know how things work. And if you focus on these 5 pillars and you're continually looking for ways to expand your skill set and become as broad as possible in terms of your transferable skills, which are skills that are relevant across a wide variety of industries and roles, things like project management, marketing, sales, applied technology.
mhm.
If you really zero in on those things, then you will have career durability. And I think you'll find that no matter what happens, you're able to pivot or transition into a different type of role.
Yes. Well, I feel an article coming on. No telling. We'll have to talk later. But
Okay.
but I think it's really important that people understand that very last part about the transferable skills and of what it really means. I mean, there are plenty of areas where people can actually jump, and we talked about before we got on that college education necessarily isn't necessarily going to be the thing to help you make the jumps. There are
Mhm.
plenty of certificates. There's
Mhm.
plenty of even YouTubes if you really want to hack it. And in fact,
Mhm.
if you can hack it, in some cases, that's even better than getting the certificate and probably a lot less cheaper.
It's
But
faster.
all in all, yeah, and faster. But I
Mhm.
think people need to stop looking and say, this is where I'm going to park all the time. You got to look at where all the other parking spaces are uh,
Yeah.
for your career in the future. Alex, I know you have to go. And thank you very much for coming on the show. And if people want to get a hold of you, how should they? Should they go ahead to alexandralevit.com?
Yeah, alexandralevit.com. You can email me there. I'd love to hear from you. I'm also on Twitter at alevit, ALEVIT, or LinkedIn. I'm on there as well. I love to dialogue with people. That's how I get the material for my books and my columns, is by learning what are the hot button issues that people are facing today and how can I help to the best of my ability. So
Yeah,
thank you, Michael. And
excellent.
thanks for having me.
Well, Well, thank you very much for coming back after all
Mhm.
this time. And thank the rest of you who are watching, and hopefully you'll be able to enjoy this on LinkedIn and Twitter platform. I'm going to go ahead and stream it to YouTube sometime tomorrow, probably first thing. So if you want to catch it there, you can just go to my page on YouTube, which is Mark Anthony Dyson. Easy to find. In the meantime, thank you very much for joining us. Peace in the Valley of Love, and we're done
Mhm.
with this interview.
Thanks, Mark.